Kristen Welker. Let me play what the president had to say about his conversation with Putin, which is completely different from what the White House official version of it was. Let's watch.
Remember this, the Russia hoax made it very hard for Russia and the United States to deal with each other. They're a very important nation. We're the most powerful nation. They're a very powerful nation. Why would we not be dealing with each other? But the Russia hoax, this absolute dishonest hoax, made it very difficult for our nation and their nation to deal. And we discussed that. I said, you know, it's a very appropriate time because things are falling out now and coming in line, showing what a hoax this whole investigation was. It was a total disgrace. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of things happen over the next number of weeks.
So he's saying, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of things happening. He's talking to America's chief adversary, Vladimir Putin, and saying to him that this was a hoax on the day that the Flynn prosecution is dropped. And after the united conclusion of the intelligence agencies was that Russia did try to interfere and did try to attack our election. I mean, it's beyond belief.
That's right. And remember, Andrea, why Flynn was fired in the first place, because he lied to the vice president about the contacts and the nature of the conversations that he was having with Russian officials. That is something that President Trump said apart from any investigation into Michael Flynn. And so now you see the president not only defending Michael Flynn, defending this decision and this recommendation by the Justice Department, but again, underscoring, as you point out, that he intends to have more and significant interactions with the Russian officials in the wake of all of this. I also think it's worth noting, Andrea, the fact that President Trump has said he would be open to the possibility of potentially bringing Flynn back into his administration. Now, it's going to be up to a judge whether or not he actually accepts the DOJ's recommendation. But again, a little bit of rewriting history here, because it was President Trump himself who said he fired Flynn for lying to the vice president about his interactions with Russian officials, Andrea.
And Frank Figliuzzi, when we looked at this, Judge Sullivan, of course, had been incredibly critical in open court of Michael Flynn when he first pleaded guilty, saying that he was a disgrace, that he betrayed his country. What do you expect? Will he ask for a hearing? Will he take a tough line, or will he go along with this? Is there any way to predict?
I think the judge is going to make DOJ work for this dismissal request. I think it's unlikely and quite rare for a judge to not go with a prosecution recommendation to dismiss, but I think he's going to make them earn it, and I think it's going to be embarrassing as they try to lay out and defend all the statements that are out of context or distorted within their pleading. And I think we need to learn even more about why an assistant U.S. attorney has walked away from this case. We need details on that, and I think the judge is empowered to look into that as well.
And Michael Steele, there were even implications when the president was asked about Chris Wray today on a Fox interview, I believe, and he said, well, he was Rod Rosenstein, then the deputy AG's pick, not mine. Do you think that the president in an election year could get away with trying to fire a tenured, 10-year termed Christopher Wray of the FBI?
In terms of the political institutions and Capitol Hill leadership, sure. What have they done to hold the president accountable on anything else? The president's talking about possibly bringing Michael Flynn back into the administration in some form. Bet on that. If he can get, that's his Russia guy. Bet on it. If he can get Flynn back in the door, he will. And there won't be a peep from, probably Democrats will be upset, but Republicans, what are they going to say? What have they said so far? And so, I look at this more broadly for folks who are sitting in jail right now who pled guilty, to a crime. They're sitting there going, okay, so when is the DOJ or the prosecutor going to come back and throw my conviction out? It just undermines the entire criminal justice system and the justice system overall, to see the attorney general just sort of willy-nilly come to the table and go, okay, you're free to go. We don't want to prosecute this anymore. Everybody was worried about the president's pardon power. Little did we know that the Attorney General also had a pardon power, and that was just not to prosecute, just to throw it out. And to Frank's point, I think the judge should make them earn this. And I get it, you know, they certainly don't want to go against the prosecutor's recommendation. But in this case, they got to look real long and hard at it and really ask the question, given what we said as a court to Mike Flynn a year ago, what position do we take now? What's changed? And the only thing that's changed is that the Attorney General said, nah, we think we should just let him go now.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.